My name is Elise Morton, and that Christmas dinner was the night the script flipped. Valerie had filled the table with gold-rimmed plates, candles that smelled like cinnamon, and a crowd of relatives who adored her stories. I'd barely finished cutting my turkey when my mother raised her glass and said, "Your sister just bought a beautiful house. Elise, when will you finally settle down?" I felt every head turn toward me like they were waiting for my usual polite laugh. The one that let everyone keep pretending I didn't notice the comparison. Valerie leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine like it was part of the performance, and said, "Maybe next year you'll finally get your life together." Her tone was light, but the smirk wasn't. My mother smiled at her, proud, the way she used to when we were kids and Valerie won something small enough to brag about. I set down my fork, feeling that familiar burn in my chest cool into something sharper, quieter, steadier. The room buzzed with soft laughter until I said, "Already did. I just didn't invite anyone who doubts me." The words came out smooth, not loud, but they sliced through the noise like glass. My mother froze mid-sip. Valerie blinked once, and someone's fork hit a plate. I could see the disbelief tightening around their faces, the kind that hides behind polite smiles when they realize they've misread you completely. For a second, no one moved. The music from Valerie's speaker looped softly in the background, pretending everything was still perfect. I looked at both of them, calm as the wine in my glass, and said, "You don't have to toast me. I'm already fine." And in that moment, surrounded by their silence, I finally was. I grew up in a house where love was measured by applause, and Valerie always knew how to get the room to clap. When she won her first dance trophy, my mother threw a party so big the neighbors thought it was someone's wedding. Balloons filled the living room. A cake shaped like a crown sat in the center, and everyone toasted to her bright future. The same year, I won a statewide writing award, and my mother looked up from her cooking just long enough to say, "That's nice, Elise. But look at what Valerie's doing." Moments like that didn't just happen once. They became the rhythm of our home. When Valerie needed a new prom dress, our family picnic was canceled because sales only last today. When I had a piano recital, I played to an empty chair where my mother was supposed to sit. Later hearing she'd gone to watch Valerie's volleyball game, I once asked why it always had to be her. And my mother said, "Your sister's things are more important right now. People count on her." Those words built a hierarchy I could never climb. No matter how hard I tried, by the time I reached high school, I learned that silence was safer than asking for fairness. Valerie was loud and golden, and I was the quiet one who kept the house running while no one noticed. During dinners, relatives asked Valerie about her friends and plans while I cleared plates, pretending I didn't hear. Mia, my cousin, would whisper later, "She has no idea what she's missing out on with you." And for a while, that was enough to keep me from breaking. But it didn't stop the ache of being invisible in my own home. Years later, when Valerie stayed close to home for community college, my mother called it the smart choice. When I got into a state university on scholarships, she said, "That's expensive. Elise, maybe think smaller." I worked double shifts at a coffee shop to pay my rent while Valerie got help with her tuition and gas money. I once told my mother, "I'm doing everything on my own," and she smiled like she didn't hear me. It was in that silence that I decided if no one was going to see me, I'd make sure they couldn't ignore me forever. The backyard was dressed like a celebration ad, with balloons tied to the fence and a cake that said, "Congratulations on your new home, Valerie." My mother moved through the crowd like the proud host of someone else's success story, while I stayed near the grill beside my father, flipping burgers and pretending I couldn't feel the weight of every question about whether I was still in that little apartment in the city. I smiled when an aunt said, "At least you don't have a mortgage yet." Though what I wanted to say was that freedom costs more than any down payment. When I went inside to refill the ice bucket, the sound of their voices stopped me at the doorway. Valerie sat at the table with a stack of papers spread out like cards she didn't know how to play. My mother leaned over, glasses slipping down her nose, whispering, "I just don't know how you're going to keep up with all of this. 3 credit cards, a car payment, and now a mortgage?" Valerie sighed and said, "If I don't buy now, I'll never get in." "Everyone my age owns a house," my mother asked. "How much are you short for closing?" And Valerie slid a page across the table. Her voice small but practiced. "About 10 grand. Maybe a little more if they don't waive the fees." When my mother hesitated, Valerie added, "Maybe you could pull from your savings or the retirement account again. Just this once. Until I get my promotion." My mother frowned, the way she did when she already knew she'd say yes, and said, "I'll see what I can move around." Valerie nodded, relief softening her face. I stood there, invisible as always, realizing the same woman who told me to stand on my own 2 feet was now bending over backwards for the daughter who never had to. I stepped back before they saw me, my pulse sharp with something colder than anger. A few minutes later, I walked in carrying the ice bucket like I hadn't heard a thing. My mother straightened immediately, sliding the papers into an envelope while Valerie forced a smile. "There you are," she said too brightly. "We were just talking about interest rates." I looked at her, then at my mother, and said evenly, "Funny. I didn't realize you both had so much in common with the banks." Neither of them answered, and the silence between us said everything. That night after the cookout, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and every account pulled up on the screen. The numbers were steady, the result of years of double shifts, cheap groceries, and quiet discipline. I called a financial advisor the next morning, and when he looked through everything, he said, "You've done the work. Elise, you can buy in cash if you want to avoid the mortgage headache." The idea startled me at first, not because I couldn't do it, but because no one in my family would ever believe I could. I spent the next week visiting listings, keeping my voice calm and professional while realtors assumed I was just window shopping. One afternoon, I stepped into a lakefront bungalow with sunlight spilling through wide windows, and something in me stilled. It wasn't extravagant, just peaceful, like the opposite of every room I'd ever lived in before. When I ran the numbers later that night, they worked. I met Mia for coffee and told her what I was doing. She stared at me, half grinning, half in shock. "You're really doing it?" she asked. And I nodded. "I'm tired of asking to be seen," I said, stirring my drink until the ice cracked. "This time, I'm not showing anyone until it's real." She laughed softly, the kind of sound that carries pride without pity, and said, "You always were the quiet storm in this family." 3 weeks later, the papers were signed, and I wired the full amount. No bank, no cosigner, no calls to anyone named Morton. The day I picked up the keys, the realtor smiled and said, "Most people don't buy like this." And I replied, "That's kind of the point." Standing in the empty living room, I listened to the faint echo of water outside and realized that silence could sound like freedom. I didn't take photos or post anything online. The moment was too sacred for an audience. I just set the keys on the counter, sat on the floor, and said out loud, "It's mine. Dollars." Christmas at Valerie's house looked like something pulled from a magazine, the kind of polished perfection my mother worshipped. The tree glittered, the lights hummed softly, and every relative carried a glass of wine like they were part of a stage play. I parked a few houses down, holding the bottle I brought out of habit, already rehearsing the small talk I'd need to survive the night. Valerie opened the door, eyes scanning my coat, and said, "You look nice." Kind of simple, but nice. Oh. Inside, my mother moved through the kitchen like it was her own, checking dishes and giving orders she didn't need to give. Mia caught my eye from across the room, the only person who smiled without pretending. Dinner began loud and bright, full of stories about promotions that never happened and vacations that sounded borrowed from catalogs. I stayed quiet, letting their laughter roll over me until my mother tapped her glass with her fork and said, "I just want to say how proud I am of my daughter for buying this beautiful house. Valerie really built something special." Ah. Then she turned to me, her voice sweet but sharp. "Your sister bought a home. Elise, when will you finally settle down?" Valerie leaned back in her chair and smirked. "Yeah. Elise, when are you going to stop playing city girl and get your life together? You can't live in that tiny apartment forever." The table paused, waiting for my usual quiet deflection. But something in me stayed still instead of small. I set down my fork and said, "I'm already settled. I just didn't invite anyone who doubts me." My mother blinked, confusion flickering across her face before she laughed like I'd made a joke. "Oh. Elise, you're renting. That's not the same thing," she said, waving her hand. I held her gaze. "I'm not renting. I bought a house months ago. 3 bedrooms. Office. Lakeview. Paid in cash." The silence hit hard enough to make the air feel different. Someone's fork clinked against a plate. Valerie's smile twitched. My mother's froze. "You bought what?" she asked. Her tone caught between disbelief and panic. "You didn't tell anyone?" I said evenly. "Every time I tried to tell you something, you changed the subject to Valerie. Why would I bother? This is ridiculous." My mother snapped, the edges of her voice cracking. "Your sister worked so hard for this place. And you're trying to one-up her at her own dinner?" I leaned back in my chair, the calm finally real. "I'm not trying to one-up anyone. I'm just not pretending anymore." Valerie's voice rose, sharper than her earrings. "So you think you're better than me because you have some lake house and a title at work?" I looked at her and said, "No. I just stopped playing a game that was rigged from the start." "Dawn." Mia shifted, watching the exchange like she'd been waiting years for it. My mother slammed her napkin down. "Enough. Elise, you're ruining Christmas." I met her eyes, my tone quiet but steady. "No. Mom, you ruined Christmas the moment you turned it into a competition. I'm just done keeping score." Valerie's laugh came out brittle. "You're jealous. That's all this is." I tilted my head slightly. "If I wanted what you had, I wouldn't have bought peace instead." 8. The room stayed frozen. The hum of the lights, the only sound left. My father cleared his throat. But even he knew better than to step in. I stood, sliding my chair back against the floor. "Where are you going?" my mother demanded. "Home," I said. "The one I built myself." Valerie rolled her eyes. "Running away again?" I looked at her one last time and said, "No. Walking out finally feels like staying true." Mia stood too, grabbing her coat. "I'll walk her out," she said quietly. And no one stopped her. We crossed the room through the stunned silence of people realizing the story they'd told themselves no longer fit. Outside, the cold hit like fresh air after years of holding my breath. As we stepped into the driveway, Mia whispered, "You know they'll never forget that." I smiled, unlocking my car. "That's the point," I said. "They finally saw me." Tote. 3 months after that dinner, the family group chat went silent except for the occasional meme sent by relatives pretending nothing had happened. Word reached me through Mia that Valerie's debts had started stacking faster than she could hide them. The promotion she'd bragged about never came. And without it, the house that once made my mother beam became a weight she couldn't carry. I didn't feel vindicated, just finished with the story. When the foreclosure notice arrived, my mother called me nonstop. Her first voicemail was sharp. "How could you embarrass your sister like that?" The next one was quieter. "She's struggling. Elise, you could loan her something. You have money now." Then came the final message, her voice breaking. "We're still family. Please help." I listened to all of them while sitting on my porch, the lake calm in front of me. I called her back once and said, "I'm glad you finally see how it feels when the help doesn't come." She tried to answer, but I didn't let her. "I have peace now. Mom, I'm not trading it," I said and ended the call. That night, for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible, I felt free. Spring came quietly, the lake thawing just enough to mirror the sky again. Mia and her parents visited one weekend, bringing too many snacks and stories that didn't need to be about anyone else's downfall. As we watched the water, Mia said, "You know, they're still talking about that dinner." And I smiled. "Let them," I replied. "It means they finally noticed." When they left, I sat on the porch listening to the calm settle back in. The kind of silence that doesn't ache anymore. Peace wasn't loud or dramatic, it just stayed. And that was enough. Thank you for staying with my story. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, remember peace can be the sharpest form of revenge. Comment "I see you" if you've built your strength quietly and on your own terms. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one.